This particular encounter still freaks me out. I know how horrible it could have ended, and I sometimes thank my crippling social anxiety, as well as general common sense, for preventing the worst. My freshman year of high school, when I was about 14, proved challenging socially. Afraid to really connect with strangers, I would typically eat lunch by myself or sit in the back of a classroom to avoid detection. I did have a few close friends from band, and I also grew fond of an equally awkward girl in my public speaking class. Now, because our public speaking teacher was also the drama teacher and cared much more about the musical than assigning us speeches, we never had to stand up in front of the class. Instead, I would walk into the room, sit down next to my friend, and talk to her for about an hour until the bell rang. After probably about 3 months, this class became a nightmare. I was walking through the halls one day in between classes when I was approached by a fellow freshman that I knew from band. She handed me a piece of paper and winked at me. "This is from Zach," she said. I believe that I stared at her rather blankly, earning me an eye roll. "The Zach that sits behind you in public speaking," she clarified. Still confused, but not wanting to appear stupid, I smiled, nodded, and thanked her. I put the note in my backpack and resolved to read it when I returned home that evening. Once in the comfort of my bedroom, I retrieved the note after recalling a very tall and large senior named Zach who did, in fact, sit behind me in that class. I didn't remember ever speaking to him, but thinking it might have been a message from the teacher, I opened the lined paper up. As I skimmed the words, I immediately became uncomfortable. Printed in sloppy handwriting was a cheesy love poem. In it, he described all of my physical features, mentioned my full name, which he spelled correctly, a feat which not many people can accomplish, and professed his undying love. Now, I was very, very confused. I had never even spoken to this kid. I only ever talked to the other freshmen in the class, and I had no account on any social media platform where he could have lifted the information. Even if I did know him, my mental issues would have definitely prevented any sort of long-term relationship. At this point, I was honestly a little more scared at the prospect of having to speak with someone I didn't know than the actual poem, but I still began to skip that particular class. After not attending public speaking for a good 2 weeks, I was eventually approached by a girl I knew from band, a fellow clarinet player by the name of Corey. "I heard you've been ditching," she said with a bit of a smirk. "Good girls don't ditch." When I just laughed and shrugged, she continued, "Well, your boyfriend thinks you're avoiding him." "What? That Zach guy? He's definitely not my boyfriend." "I have some classes with him too. I think he's a nice guy. You should give him a chance. He likes you a lot." Wanting to end the conversation, I just said that I would think about it and walked away. I think that Corey told Zach what I had said, and things started to escalate. I received a similar poem taped to my locker a few days later, and I began to see Zach standing outside of my classes as I left. Because he was blocking the door, I had no choice but to talk to him. I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember that he pulled out a large black binder and handed it to me. He told me that he was a writer, and that all the pages were filled with poems for me. After flipping through some very cringe-worthy writing, I believe that I thanked him, not wanting to hurt any feelings. He interpreted this as a go-ahead for a kiss, and I became pinned to a wall. This guy was well over 200 pounds, so he had quite the advantage physically against a small 14-year-old girl. When he finally came up for air, smiling like he had just won the ultimate prize, I told him that I was running late for my next class and he released me. I felt assaulted and even more freaked out, but I never told anyone about this. I never told anyone even when he began to wait for me by my brother's car. He went to the same school and drove me home. I never told anyone even when I saw Zach walking through my neighborhood, staring at houses intently like he was trying to figure out which one was mine. I had to change all of the routes I took to get to my classes, and I would sneak out back doors just to avoid him. I guess I figured that the school year was almost over, and once he graduated, my problems would resolve themselves. However, about a month later, I was leaving the school with a couple of band friends. It was around midnight after a musical performance. I was in the pit orchestra, and we were going to grab a bite to eat at a village inn. As I made my way to my friend's car, I felt hands grasp me around my waist. Spinning around in fright, I noticed Zach had pinned me against a different car. "I haven't seen you in a while," he said. "But that's okay. Love transcends time." I think I just smiled uncomfortably and said something about being busy with the musical. He ran a hand up my back and wrapped it around the back of my neck. "I know you're super busy, and that got me thinking. I love you more than anything, and I know that we're young, and I know that I don't have a ring, but please run away with me. Please marry me." Completely stunned and paralyzed, one of my friends arrived. She overheard the conversation and picked up on how freaked out I was, and she swooped in. "Hey," she said. "We have to leave right now. Sorry. My mom wants me home in like 5 minutes, and she'll not be happy if I'm late. Come on." She grabbed my arm and wiggled my body free from Zach. "Wait, so will you?" Zach asked as my friend dragged me away. I said something stupid about having to think about it, and I made my way into my friend's car without any other problems. We laughed and joked about it later, but it scared me enough to take my cautiousness to the next level. For the rest of the school year, I made complex plans on how to travel between classes so I wouldn't have to see him, and I made sure that I walked to and from any car with a group of people. Again, I never told anyone, even though an 18-year-old adult man proposing to and stalking a young girl was more than not okay. I wish I had, though, and I wish it had ended there. A few years ago, when I was about 21, I was scrolling through my Facebook page when, all of a sudden, messages from people I hadn't talked to in years began flooding in. They all said something along the lines of, "Holy shit, this is creepy. Oh my god, are you okay?" And they included links to a news article. Apparently, Zach had been arrested for the possession of child pornography and for multiple counts of molestation against a minor. A couple of the girls mentioned in the article I even knew from high school. I was pretty decent friends with them too, even though they were freshmen when I was a senior. I just hoped that he didn't hurt them because they were friends with me. He's in jail now for a very long time. However, if you search my name through Google, you'll still find books that Zach actually published, containing hundreds of poems that he dedicated to me. But honestly, I'm just glad that he's locked up and unable to hurt any more girls. This story began sometime around my junior year of high school. I was 15 years old, and in that phase of my life where I didn't listen to anyone, yet at the same time was completely impressionable. At the beginning of the year, I was sitting in my 6th period chem class, probably zoned out, looking at my phone under the clunky gray lab table, when I heard 2 people laughing to my right. The way the classroom was set up was a long rectangle, so essentially the teacher wouldn't really be able to hear what was going on in the back. The people laughing were a guy and a girl, Eric and Callie. They were somewhat popular, not the top of the food chain by any means, but everyone knew who they were. My younger sister knew Eric personally. They had a tennis match about a month or 2 earlier. Eric was really funny. That's a crucial element to this story. He was definitely the class clown. He was tall, good-looking, and extremely charismatic. I wasn't attracted to him, but I could see why everyone else was. I think it was at this point in time where I made one of the most regrettable decisions of my life. I decided I wanted to be friends with Eric. Eric was in my 2nd, 5th, and 6th periods. The next morning, I poked him in the back in Spanish class. "Hey," I said, "I heard my sister kicked your ass in tennis." He turned around with a goofy smile, his friends all looking at me. "Who's your sister?" His voice had a specific cadence to it. "Karen," I replied. I don't really remember the rest of this encounter, but I'm pretty sure he denied losing the tennis match. I think the conversation ended shortly thereafter, and my day continued until I saw him in math class. Algebra 2 was one of those classes where the teacher would lecture for a while, give us homework, and then let us have the rest of the period to work on it so we wouldn't have to do it when we got home. I was looking at my paper, probably confused, when I hear a familiar voice. "Hey, girl." I looked down and saw Eric crouched to my desk on the floor. "What's up?" He started asking me about tennis, and once I said that I played, a huge smile spread across his face. I think this is when he latched on to me. He asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him. That day, in our next period, he introduced me to Callie. She was older and really intimidating. I had never met anyone like her, and I was beginning to get excited at the prospect of these new, interesting friends. That night, he kept texting me non-stop. He would ask me questions and then would reply ha 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 to everything I said. I thought it was weird, but that was just his humor. After this day, he never left my side. We spent most of the school day together, and then would be in constant contact after school. This was 2011, so we were mostly on Facebook or doing group phone calls with Callie and 2 other friends of mine that I had brought into the group, Sasha and Natalie. There were lots of red flags. Eric wanted me to hold hands with him at school, and told everyone he had taken my virginity. For some reason, this wasn't something I got too mad about. I just thought it was weird. He would say, "Your virginity belongs to me." Again, I assumed it was a joke. I always assumed Eric wasn't attracted to girls because he said he wasn't, although he would have sex with them and tell everyone, making fun of them. He would walk down the hallway after 5th period, and he would stop for a group of freshman girls waiting for him, to give them each a peck on the lips. One time we were walking to the bus, and there was a girl about 10 feet in front of us. She was cheating on her boyfriend, which I whispered to him, pointing her out. Yes, it was childish, but keep in mind this was high school, and I was 15. He proceeds to run towards her, stops her, only to point at me and tell her what I said. She came over and yelled at me, and he watched, laughing. A few months into the friendship, I began sneaking out with Eric, bringing him alcohol from my dad's liquor cabinet. Eric was a heavy drinker, especially considering our age. This came to a head when he asked Callie and I to come over one night. His dad was in prison and his mom was in rehab, so he lived with his grandparents. We pulled up outside his house and his car wasn't there. We waited for a while, and finally he sped into the neighborhood and stumbled out of the driver's side wasted. We followed him inside. His grandparents weren't home. I don't know what I said, but next thing I know, he grabs a knife off the kitchen counter and charges at me. I took off running and made it into Callie's car, slamming the door shut and locking it. He stares at me through the window before bursting out in laughter. My heart was racing, and my blood ran cold. Callie got into the car and we left. I don't know why I stuck around. It was almost like an abusive relationship. He told me he was the only guy who would ever find me attractive, but somehow it would turn into a joke, and I would let it go. I believe the breaking point was when I heard about the baby squirrel. He had found a live baby squirrel after school and brought it home. His grandparents said they didn't want it in the house, so he walked outside and tossed it into the retention pond before walking back in. I wasn't there for that, but it disgusted me all the same. In algebra a few days later, he knocked my pen off my desk and called me a bitch. "Eric, I don't want to be friends with you anymore," I told him firmly. "Don't talk to me." His head snapped back, and he moved to the desk in front of mine. "You won't be able to ignore me," he laughed. "I know where to find you." "I'm going to college next year," I reminded him. "You'll never be able to get away from me." "Are you threatening me?" "Yes." I know this sounds like a cheesy horror movie, but that was our exchange word for word. The next week was endless phone calls, and him trying to get me to talk to him at school. At first it was jovial, when he thought I was going to change my mind. Then he came up to me in math class and opened his backpack. Inside, there were several large kitchen knives. In case there's a zombie attack. Another big smile. I should have told the teacher at that point. I really should have. But it wasn't until a few days later when he pushed me too far. I'm going to rape you, then murder you, and I'll make Natalie film it. I went to the dean's office and told them everything. I had grown up being told not to snitch, but I couldn't focus on class anymore. I had been a good kid. I'd never been in trouble, so they believed what I told them. Here's the kicker. They called him into the office and he admitted to everything. Nodded, smiling, confirming all the stories I'd told them. Dean Thomas sat me down the next day and told me that I needed to call the police. They said there was clearly something wrong with him and that he didn't get it. They put a school version of a restraining order on him. He wasn't to talk to me, and during tests he had to be taken to a separate classroom. He would do everything he could to get around those rules. He would talk about me right in front of my face, but wasn't technically talking to me. He said out loud to the class, "Some girl put a restraining order on me because she thinks I'm dangerous." The teacher laughed and said, "Doesn't she know you're joking? That's just you being Eric, right?" The backlash I faced was enormous. All of his groupies shunned and laughed at me. Even my own friends said I was overreacting. Except for Natalie. She was always intuitive, and she said he made her feel very uncomfortable, and had started following her from class to class. When his birthday came, he approached me with Callie, and Callie said, "He wants you to wish him a happy birthday." Eventually, a mutual friend called me and told me Eric had threatened to kill himself if I wouldn't talk to him again. I went back to the dean's office. This time, every dean, vice principal, and even the principal got involved. My school was big, and there were 550 kids in my class. The school year ended, and without the protection of the authorities there, I was fielding more phone calls. When I blocked his number, he would just call me on Callie's phone. He would drive around my neighborhood to see if my car was in the driveway. He even came to my tennis matches, the ones we initially bonded over. I could see his silhouette in the fence watching me. By senior year, things had calmed down a bit. His attention was elsewhere, and I had picked my classes with the dean to ensure we weren't in any together. He was still watching. I would be walking down the hallway with someone he didn't know, and all of a sudden he would be walking with us next to my unassuming friend. "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you." He told my friends he had decided to wait for me, because we were soulmates and I'd come around eventually. I graduated high school and moved out of town. I told my new college friends that if something ever happened to me, he was the one who did it. And that's all. There's no conclusion, really. Except he always knows when I come into town. I don't know how because I blocked him on everything. I suspect he still stalks my house. He's been arrested since on drug charges and a few DUIs. I'm looking at his mugshots as I write this to remember those dead eyes. Sometimes, I think maybe I overreacted. Maybe it really was all a joke.
When I was a little girl, maybe around 11 years old, a cult tried to recruit me and my friends through the dark web. This was in 2012. We lived in a gated community, but somehow this church named Assembly of Prayer Christian Church would have its members walking around trying to get everyone to attend their church. My friends and I would go to the local pool for our neighborhood, and these people were taking pictures of everyone, including parents, lifeguards, and us. We looked up their Facebook, but none of the pictures would be there. It only showed the outside of their building. Then a rumor started to circulate that these pictures were on the deep web. I didn't believe it until all of my friends and I went over our friend Greg's house. Greg went on a regular browser, but somehow got on the deep web. I didn't know much about it, so I just watched. We looked up Assembly of Prayer Christian Church, and some Facebook popped up again. We went to it, but we can see more photos than we could before. It was like we had more access than before, but still didn't see much, just inside their chapel. That's when Greg mentioned that the rest of the photos might be on the dark web. I only knew about the deep web, but they sounded like the same thing. That's when he went on a browser. It wasn't Tor, it was some other browser that I can't remember the name of. He made a call and asked someone on the phone where and how to search what he was looking for. We interrupted him, telling him that he needs to just put the church name in again. He said it's not that easy. When he got off the phone, he searched "Free the Dolphins from Yellow Cowboy." Then the Facebook page popped up, but we had complete access, not as an admin, but as if we were a friend or we were following the page. Then we saw the pictures. But what was creepy is that every single picture had a name of the person, or multiple names if it were more than one person. We then saw our pictures. There were a picture with about 8 of us in it walking to the pool with a link under it. Greg clicked on it. We entered a live video. We were looking at the inside of the chapel with a man standing on a podium. He said, "Welcome, number 77. In the top right-hand corner of our screen was 77. We were number 77. Greg typed hi. Then the man on the stage said that he was called Chief, so just type Chief if we need him. Greg typed okay. Chief then said that he would continue. He picked up a picture. It was one of my friends. He held it in front of the camera, then everyone in the chat put numbers. I saw a lot of numbers between 1 and 5. A few were higher than 5. Greg looked at us confused. Then Chief looked at the camera and said, "Number 77, we're waiting for you." I believe he typed 3. I can't really remember. For the next hour or so, this man that was called Chief had put all of our pictures in front of the camera, and we were rated between 1 and 10. By coincidence, I had the highest rating. Out of nowhere, the stream ended, and we were back on the Facebook page with all of our pictures. But all of our pictures disappeared. Being that this is all we got on for, we got off, and all of us went home. The next couple of days seemed weird. The church people disappeared. No one was asking us to join anymore. One day, everything became even more strange. One of my friends were over my house while my parents were at work. We were on Facebook watching YouTube. We both paused and looked at each other. I looked outside the window and one of the people from the church were just standing there. I looked back at my friend and she pointed at the front door. I looked out the peephole and another guy was standing there. We looked out the back window and there were literally 20 people standing in a formation. So I called the police like any other person would. And of course, these people were long gone by the time the police arrived. The police said that they will keep a report on file. They tried looking at the security cameras throughout the neighborhood, but nothing was showing these people, and there were time gaps within the footage. It's been a while since this incident, but I will never forget what happened when I went on the dark web.